You're live.
Okay, so let's call this meeting to order at looks like 1:33 p.m. Ms. Pingarelli, if you can lead us in the pledge, after a moment of silence, while we continue to keep those individuals impacted by COVID-19 in our thoughts and certainly prayers. I would also like to acknowledge, Peoria's finest, our first responders and really our 4,000 plus associates throughout the district that continue to work tirelessly to support our students in these new times. All of our teachers, staff, certified non-classroom, district leadership, and site leadership. So if we can keep them in our hearts and our thoughts, as we go through this moment of silence, and then followed by a Ms. Pingarelli leading us into the pledge. Okay.
Excuse me, President Sandoval. I just need to do a quick roll call for the record, please.
Sure. Go ahead, please.
Mrs. Pingarelli.
Here.
Mr. Sandoval.
Here.
Mrs. Doan.
Here.
Mrs. Seja Martinez.
Here.
Mrs. Underhill.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kim. I apologize. That's part of our protocol. So that said, let's go through a moment of silence, and then Ms. Pingarelli, after you feel comfortable, please lead us in the pledge.
Thank you. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Sandoval.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along. We are moving on to section 3, discussion items. 3.1, facilities assessment and utilization study discussion. It looks like that's being presented by an entire team led by Ms. Myers and Mr. Duguid. And Mr. Duguid.
Well, good afternoon, President Sandoval, members of the governing board, and Mrs. Pallas Thompson and administration. Thank you for the opportunity to provide summary information on the recently published district facilities assessment and utilization studies. In September of last year, the governing board approved the hiring of ADM Group Inc. and their subcontractor ThinkSmart Planning to conduct a district-wide facility assessment and utilization study. The resulting reports were published this spring, and study information was presented to the Citizens Advisory Committee on April 15th by David Peterson from the ADM Group and Molly Smith with the firm ThinkSmart Planning. The information that is being shared today are highlights from the presentation on April 15th, and the information that is attached to the agenda item has been previously sent to the governing board. The meeting was held virtually and streamed on the internet for the community on April 15th and can be viewed as it is archived if someone was not able to watch it on the day the meeting took place. As was shared during the prior presentation, a facilities assessment is a first step to developing a facilities master plan that addresses campus needs and associated costs for long-term bond and capital planning. During the presentation, ADM Group shared facility needs at each of the district's schools and support facilities. The identified needs were prioritized based on the critical nature of the repairs and improvements. The costs of the improvements were determined for each site, with priority projects being based on safety, code compliance, and the educational needs of the campus. During the presentation, summary information was provided related to how property characteristics and conditions of school campuses and building systems were evaluated and inventoried as a foundational part of the study. The resulting costs related to required repairs and upgrades to restore building systems to an optimal condition was also discussed. In addition to building systems, 5 other assessment categories were reviewed, including site improvements, other structure improvements, and flooring. The facility assessment categories and associated costs were then combined into a multi-year approach, as well as a priority ranking system. The final facility assessment report has identified in excess of $301 million of projected repairs and maintenance and other upgrades that will be required district-wide over the next 15 years. And I will comment here that the graph is rather small in this particular presentation, but it is in a separate PDF attached to the agenda item and can be enlarged and viewed as necessary. Next slide, please. The 15 years of data was then further refined to be broken out into a 5-year and 10-year timeline for elementary schools, as presented on this slide. And then if we move to the next slide, the report also categorized high school facility repair and upgrade costs over the next 5 and 10 years. District-wide, the 5-year projected cost is $131.7 million, and the 10-year cost is $257.7 million. The district-wide projects and associated expenditures were also broken out as a high, medium, and low priority. And the way that those priorities were defined is priority group 1 is a high priority or critical, and examples of those types of projects would include code and life safety, potential risk of injury, health and environmental safety, and system failure, which could include HVAC, plumbing, or roofs. Priority group 2 are medium priority projects, meaning they're necessary but wearing out. And those types of projects include integrity of walls, insulation and ceilings, system equipment replacement, including HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, as well as building envelopes, roofs, expansion joints, windows, secure fencing, flooring replacements, and parking lots, as well as built-in equipment, including kitchens and theaters, bleachers and lockers as an example. And then priority group 3, which is the low priority projects, are desirable upgrades. They're general system upgrades that improve the environmental qualities of a building or a site, and might include playground surfaces as an example, AV projectors, window treatments. They also might have a benefit as providing an aesthetic improvement in comparison to priority groups 1 and 2, which are less optional and in some cases critical. Next slide, please. The 15-year facility improvements by priority reports includes $269 million district-wide of high priority and medium priority projects, including soft costs over the next 15 years. Soft costs are an expense item that's not considered a direct construction cost and includes architectural, engineering, bond financing, and legal fees. At the April 15th Citizens Advisory Committee meeting, Molly Smith from Think Smart Planning also provided an overview of the facility capacity and utilization study that her firm conducted for the district. During the presentation, it was noted that the report was a snapshot in time, and the study provided a summary of the capacity versus enrollment by grade level and by school to determine efficiency and the ability to accommodate growing or declining student populations. Enrollment trends from applied economics were considered in the study, as well as mitigating factors related to self-contained special education, pre-kindergarten, and art and music programming. Think Smart Planning, on the next slide, has also provided data by elementary school. And if we'll move to that slide, please. One back, please. And as I was mentioning, Think Smart Planning has provided data by elementary school and by area, showing utilization rates and determining if any schools were over capacity or underutilized. The study found that for elementary schools, the most seats available are in Area 2. And again, this graph or detail is available in a separate PDF attached to this agenda item that can be enlarged and also includes the methodology highlights that were used as part of the study. We'll go to the next slide, please. The same approach was taken for the high schools, identifying which school has seats available or which schools were over capacity. Next slide. Within the report, and also I should mention attached to this agenda item is the presentation, the actual PowerPoint slide presentation that ADM Group and Think Smart Planning did provide. And so some of the information in this particular summary are from, or is rather from that presentation that was given on April 15th. And the conclusions here on this slide are from the presentation. And Think Smart Planning did report that the majority of the open seats in Peoria Unified are at the elementary school level. And at the high school level, the open seats is significantly lower. We have the 22% open seat percentage with the elementary schools, where at the high schools it's 2%. And you'll see that summarized on this particular slide from the presentation. And if we move on, the Citizens Advisory Committee members have considered the data that has been shared and presented, and they are reminded of their scope. Their purpose is to make a recommendation to the governing board regarding calling for a bond and or override election on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020, and associated amounts and or percentages to correspond with each respective recommendation. Next steps related to the information shared today from a facility utilization or boundary perspective and related discussions will require the formation of a new committee with a modified scope, because those types of recommendations and decisions at a school level, at a site level, are outside of the scope of the committee as it was formed in February of this year. And so with that, we move to the final slide. This concludes the presentation. Administration is available to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Myers, Mr. Duguid, for the continued just great and diligent work around this subject. That said, I'm going to go through all of our fellow board members and go through any comments, questions they may have for you and teams. Ms. Stone?
I don't have anything right now. I'm going to wait.
Okay, fair enough. Ms. Underhill?
Yes, thank you guys. This has been really good information and appreciate it, all the stuff you provided along the way. On the high priority needs, are some of those, I guess I'm just trying to figure out, we don't have a whole lot of funding left through the current bond, I know. Would some of those be taken care of with that amount, and are in, have we figured out like how many of those high priority needs like need to be done today, versus within a year or 2 years? I'm just trying to, get an idea of like the urgency behind those.
Thank you, Mrs. Underhill, President Sandoval. The information in the reports that we've looked at today and what has been presented to the Citizens Advisory Committee is summary information. Each school, each facility has multiple pages of data related to the site and the critical aspects of any pending projects, that ranking of low, medium, and high priority. So that information is being evaluated by Mr. Duguid and Mr. Deeg. Mr. Deeg is on the call today, and I should mention Mr. Duguid is not able to join us today. So Mr. Deeg and I will be answering any questions on the facility side that may come up. But with that, we are looking at those critical needs, of course, safety always being a priority with remaining bond dollars, as well as our annual capital funding allocations. So yes, that high priority column, that orange highlight with a dollar amount of $9,040,314, would, if those items need to be addressed immediately, they would have to come out of existing bond dollars or capital funds.
And thank you, Ms. Myers. And I'm sorry, I know you've told us this many times, but what is our balance of our existing bond funds?
So approximately 15 million. We do have encumbrances related to some student transportation purchases that may either clear this year or roll into next year. But last reconciliation, it was approximately 15 million. We've fully expended the bond as far as, sold rather, not expended. We fully sold the bond authorization, so there are no pending bond sales per se, but remaining proceeds from past bond sales are with the district, and we have approximately $15 million remaining that we'll need to bridge into next year. You'll recall that a district typically has 3 years to spend bond proceeds because of the tax exempt nature of the bond sale, and so there's an expectation they would be spent within 3 years. So we can't hold on to those remaining dollars indefinitely, but they are being budgeted across fiscal 2021. And if there are any remaining dollars at that point, they might go into fiscal 22. But it's a very small amount in the scope of what we manage, coupled with the funding that's available from capital restoration at this time.
Great, thank you. And just one more question. If, say we were to pass a bond either this year or next year, what's the timeline for being able to, get the capital from that sale? How does that work as far as being able to access that capital?
Thank you, Mrs. Underhill, President Sandoval, members of the board. A bond authorization is a threshold, an amount that you can sell bonds up to. We never would sell bonds in the amount of a full authorization cap. So we plan the bond sales in a way that they're a certain dollar amount. And the reason why I'm setting the stage with that background is we would have planned sales if successful in November of be it 2020 or a future year. The earliest you would be able to facilitate a sale and have proceeds is the latter part of that fiscal year. There's a timeline, a process related to having a bond sale and an official statement, due diligence activities. And so it does take months to get those proceeds. And then again, the size of the sale would be important. And you're managing the authorized categories as well, including what's permissible for elementary and high school renovations, student transportation vehicles, technology purchases. So my long-winded response is it would be several months after the election and would really bear fruit the following fiscal year from a planning perspective.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm done.
Thank you, Ms. Underhill. Ms. Pingerelli?
Oh, thank you very much. Ms. Myers, what is the dollar amount for the critical needs for 5 years for all schools in our district?
Mrs. Pingerelli, thank you for that question. Administration is evaluating the way that this report has been presented in the sense that there's the 15-year planning horizon that has the low, medium, and high priorities, and then the 5 and 10-year planning horizon report that has the low priorities embedded as well. So we would want to be able to break out that amount to update the dollar related to the 5 years. So we're in the process of evaluating how that was reported and our ability to then pull out the low priority project costs to better refine the dollar amount. Right now it's overstated because it would have those low priorities in there.
Okay. Let's see. And then so I guess when will that be? When will you have that data?
It has to be evaluated school by school. We recently received the reporting, and with the information that we have, we would also have to reconcile projects that we had planned that are currently underway compared to what's in the report that's already part of our current bond programming. So we won't have that information in the next few weeks. It takes time, and I don't know if Mr. Deeg wants to add to that as far as what's a critical, non-negotiable project that has to take place in the next few months or fiscal year compared to those second tier medium priority projects that could wait for a new bond authorization. I don't know if you want to use one or two schools as an example with the data you've looked at, or perhaps Altaloma, since that was included in the presentation, Mr. Deeg.
Yes, members of the board, bouncing off of what Michelle Myers has already prefaced, the only projects that we are currently doing are aging or end of life replacement. We are currently in the middle of a full HVAC renovation at Apache Elementary, which is all the pieces of mechanical equipment within the building itself, as well as the chillers. And we are doing that based on age. Our spending has slowed to some extent in relationship to bond. We were, you back up about 2-3 years, we had a pretty robust exterior and interior painting program that we were, as well as interior carpet. That was all stopped so that we could focus on safety. I feel at this point in time, we are pretty, on a percentage scale of being 100% complete, I would say we're probably 90% there as far as the safety piece with front office renovations, exterior perimeter fencing, and some of the other safety pieces that we've put in place. Other than that, we will start looking at this assessment to start planning future projects, as Ms. Underhill questioned, on the next critical pieces. And we will do that coupled with the age of the sites, as well as what we already know with trending data from our school dude system, with pieces of equipment that are currently giving us either ongoing issues. Just because something is 25 years old or 30 years old, the piece of 30-year-old equipment may be running like a sewing machine versus the 25-year-old piece of equipment that's giving us lots of problems. So that's how we kind of prioritize our replacement.
So what is the cost of then what you just described?
The HVAC renovation at Apache Elementary?
Yes.
That is approximately a $1.7 million project, start to finish.
Okay. And then you had said that you were basing like the air conditioning system is based on age, and then you had said it was based on condition. So are you going through and are you looking at the oldest ones first and then evaluating the condition? Is that how I understood that?
That is absolutely correct. That is exactly how we evaluate all of our equipment district-wide. The oldest stuff gets replaced first. For example, one of those exceptions, like I just identified, was Saguaro Ranch that was done last year. That school was opened and we had 30-year-old equipment that had been running flawlessly with no issues right up till the very end. And we just replaced that central plant and all the fan coils, did a full HVAC renovation of that school last year.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
Ms. Myers, then when is the final deadline that the board needs to make a decision on the bond and or override?
Thank you, Mrs. Pingarelli, members of the board. A final decision would need to be made by the end of May. We are required to notify and begin working with Maricopa County elections no later than June 6th, as far as our intention for an election question, be it a bond or override or both. So the end of May would truly be the last date that the governing board could approve a question. If I may go back to your earlier question on low priority projects and associated costs, what I can say, what we have available today as part of the discussion, there is the 15-year facility improvement handout that has the 3 columns, high priority, medium, and low. And if we look across the board, elementary and high schools, district-wide for the low priority column, and then we multiply that by the 35% soft cost allocation that's embedded in the study comprehensively, there are about $32 million of what would be, by definition, those lower priority costs that were identified during the study. And some of the best practices that I referenced at the beginning of the presentation, that the intention of a study and related work by administration, input from the governing board and committees, is really designing what's called a facilities master plan and the goals of that plan. So of course, some of those more best practice, or in some instances where it might have an aesthetic or environmental benefit versus repairing a failing HVAC system. That's the difference between low priority and high priority. So embedded in the information today, there's 32 million of low priority projects. And we know that the key would be then to reconcile, as we take the categories by school. High priority we know is non-negotiable. There might be a code or safety issue associated with it. And Mrs. Underhill asked the question about that dollar amount, is around 10 million. Then you start bridging between medium and low priorities. And from a Peoria Unified perspective, which one moves to which column and which one would not come into the mix. And those low priority projects are the ones that would have the most option to be pushed to a future bond or to be addressed in another way.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. So then can the board have a hard number for the critical needs by the end of May, and what those needs are broken out by school?
You have that information in the materials today as far as what ADM Group has identified as being high priority and medium priority, which includes critical projects. By definition, as I shared earlier, and I'm going to pull out my notes for reference, the medium priority projects include general system integrity, walls, insulation, ceilings, system equipment replacement, HVAC, EMS, lighting, intercom, building envelope, roofs with life remaining, expansion joints, windows, glazing, security fencing, flooring replacements, energy efficiency, parking lots, shade canopies, athletic facilities, tracks, courts, backstops, equipment, kitchen, theater, grandstands, bleachers, lockers, partitions, caseworks. That's the definition of priority 2, meaning necessary wearing out. Priority 1 is the critical definition, and that's where there's a potential risk of injury, code and life safety concerns, health and environmental safety, and system failure. So those two categories we have a dollar amount for today over a 15-year planning horizon, and that's included in the materials for the study session.
So by 5 years though? So that's by 15.
Yeah, we would have a 5-year view. We know that there would need to be some additional analysis, probably working back with ADM if you wanted to break it down to a 5-year. What we could more easily probably do is strip out from the 5 and 10-year number that's been provided the low priority projects, and then you would have the full breadth of priority 1 and priority 2.
All right, yeah. I mean, for me, I want the hard number for the critical needs for 5 years by when the board needs to make a decision. A very definitive, just for 5 years. That's one number. And then which schools, I guess, are at or over capacity? And I know that would be the northern schools, and I just want to, where I'm kind of getting at too is, are we following the policy that the governing board put in place on out of district students for the schools that are at or over capacity in the north?
I'm going to have Mrs. Pallas Thompson or Dr. Reynolds assist me with that response. Thank you.
Mrs. Pingarelli, this is Jason Reynolds.
Hello.
Yes, we are following. In fact, we're actually currently in the process of reassessing our open enrollment procedures. We have a committee meeting next week to both review practice and policy. First steps are to ensure that we are following policy. And second steps to review policy and make sure that it still reflects best practice. So we would potentially be bringing certainly an update, but potential governing board policy changes in the next month.
Do you have in front of you which schools are at or over capacity at this time?
Mrs. Pingarelli, in the materials for today's study session, there is a document that says the title is Utilization Study Methodology Aggregate Data. And in that document, there is the district-wide summary, and I had portions of that in the presentation. And if we pull it up, it's easier to read than in the PowerPoint. And actually not the PowerPoint, I think where we were just at, Robert, if you could go back to what you had open, that's where we needed to be. We'll be able to pull up what Think Smart Planning reported. Keep going down, it's at the end. There it is. And we might be able to enlarge this, but again, the governing board has all of these materials. And here, Think Smart did report by definition that their methodology, and again, that's detailed in the summary report, schools that have seats available or that are being considered over capacity or underutilized, and that's in the far right column. So for instance, with our elementary schools, we do have Park Ridge at the definition of overcapacity, Sunset Heights, Vistancia, and then a number of our high schools at the bottom of the report. There's the next category that's defined as nearing capacity, and then low, and then underutilized.
And what is the definition of capacity for each school?
Molly Smith spent quite a bit of time during her presentation to the Citizens Advisory Committee walking through her methodology, reconciling our staffing standards and number of seats by grade level and policy, and then also explaining mitigating factors. That is captured in this document as she walks through that methodology and how she determined what would be considered overcapacity or undercapacity, also keeping in mind mitigating factors, which are very important, including special education, self-contained programming needs, preschool, as well as when there's art and music programming. So that information is included in this document, and she spoke to it at length during the actual presentation.
Thank you. So is Liberty and Sunrise Mountain over capacity? And how many out-of-district students do they have if they are over capacity?
Mrs. Pingarelli, the information in the utilization study also reconciled to our applied economics report that we get each year. I do believe we have Mr. Moss on the call, part of the meeting today, and perhaps he could speak to open enrollment at those schools. The enrollment and areas that were considered for this study that was published do reconcile to applied economics. And I'll ask Mr. Moss to speak to that, please.
Just give me a second. I'm having to look up the exact numbers for what the open enrollment is for each school out of district. And this is in the applied economics report. Sunrise Mountain currently has, or as of in this current year, has 275 students out of district, and Liberty has 228.
And are they at or over capacity?
Yes, based upon the capacity, based upon the calculations that were done, both of those schools show to be over capacity.
And then I thought the policy that the governing board put in place was that they were supposed to be reviewed and that we would not put that burden on teachers in those schools to be over capacity by out of district students.
I'm not completely comfortable replying to whether what's in policy or not in policy for open enrollment. I can tell you what the numbers are. Certainly, if someone wants to chime in about what is the policy on taking open enrollments, that would be helpful.
So, Mrs. Pingarelli, this is Jason Reynolds again. And I'm relatively new to the process. So as we're reviewing policy and practice, we are again in that current calendar of making sure that what we're doing in practice and what we're doing in policy match. One of the things where what we're seeing is that as we work with principals each year, and this is where we establish whether or not a school can take open enrollment. There's a lot of factors that go in, not just the facility utilization study. We work with the principal closely to determine to try to get as many students in. What ends up happening is, and we're currently working at Lake Pleasant. If you think, so we take, trying to figure out the best way to explain this. So if we take, let's just use Sunrise Mountain as an example. If you take 100 freshmen, let's say 50. If you take 50 freshmen in, it's hard to calculate what that will look like when those 50 freshmen added on to the attendance area, what that looks like 4 years from now. We try to use the demographer, we try to use all the data that we have. And so each year we look at those, that practice, we look at the policy, and we make sure, we do our very best to try to ensure that our schools are not taking on more than they can accept. When we look at Liberty and we review that in the fall, I think you can clearly see that at Liberty they are over capacity, and so they will not be taking any open enrollment for the following year.
All right. I just don't know how they got to over capacity. We've dealt with this for a number of years, and the policy changed, I believe, about 2 years ago. And I just want to make sure that we're following policy. I would assume we're not if we're over capacity in both of those schools. I mean, I've been harping on this for a while. We're putting the teachers are taking on more students in those schools. The buildings have more wear and tear, and I just want to make sure that we stay within the policy and not have over capacity when we have out of district students. I just can't see how that keeps happening.
Yes, ma'am, that's a great point. And as I stated a little earlier, I really do feel when we meet, as we continue to meet with this open enrollment committee, we'll be able to bring you not only an update, but any potential changes in the very near future to policy, that is.
Mrs. Pingarelli, this is Linda. I'm thinking that in some cases, and we might want to check on this, Dr. Reynolds, I don't know if policy indicated that siblings at some point were a group that we would be dealing with. There might be some numbers, freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors that were accepted as freshmen and now they're seniors. So that could be also what's happening. And I believe we continued with them, and employees, children, people who are employees of Liberty, for example, and we those were given a priority or an opportunity to be open enrolled. So that might be what makes up some of those numbers. And I think policy allowed that. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it did.
Thank you. And Mrs. Pingarelli, if I could mention on pages 1 and 2 of the study methodology and aggregate data file, Mrs. Smith did talk about the calculation of capacity in her report, which is, her firm's actual specific calculation. And she does note there are several methods of calculating school capacity that are utilized within the industry for school planning. And she walks through some of those examples, in that her particular calculation uses teaching stations as a primary factor. And so I just want to comment that in years past, if the district had calculated capacity or available seats compared to the study that was recently published, the firm, and Mrs. Smith used a certain approach that she details that may not be in exact alignment with what we have internally calculated in the past. So I just wanted to make that comment as well.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Ms. Pingarelli, this is Jason Reynolds again, as well as we use this information along with our demographers information to work with the principals at the individual schools. So for instance, when we worked with Mr. Setka to determine whether or not he felt that he could continue to take open enrollment, all of these things go in. So the concern right now is not today at Sunrise Mountain. We have to be very careful that we don't take too many open enrollment students, both in and out of district, and put ourselves in a situation 3 or 4 years from now, right? We have to be very, very thoughtful in that process. The larger concern then is at Liberty and how we cycle through out of district students to create capacity for any other students that might move into those neighborhoods. So I think as I stated, I think you'll see very soon some recommendations coming the board's way in a Friday report, and then potentially at a governing board meeting regarding open enrollment.
I will be looking forward to it.
Ms. Pingarelli, any other comments, questions?
Not at this point, thank you.
Okay, no, you're welcome. Ms. Martinez, before I get on to you, I do want to make a couple of comments in this area of discussion. I agree with Ms. Pingarelli. There's no doubt that we need to stay close to, our policy and how we manage, certain open enrollment, right? For a couple of reasons. One, when you do take a look at Liberty's number and you take out the number of out-of-district students that are there, we're still over, right, with in-district kids, and then we still have the growth that's going on. So, we definitely need to make sure that we're accommodating new students, and certainly, I know this is another discussion throughout this meeting, but, it's, since I was elected to the board, we've needed, a school in the north, so, or a high school up in the northern sector of our district. So, anyway, it is important that we stay close to that. And mitigate the numbers as well as we can, considering all those variables. But anyway, that said, Ms. Pingarelli, thank you for the comments. I do also want to piggyback on the 5-year view, right, of those critical needs, Ms. Myers. I've got to believe, when we take a look at how that number gets communicated to the advisory committee, and making a decision on, what makes most sense for a dollar amount tied to a bond, and then you factor in, our future discussion, around mobilizing a team, a committee to, really take a look at this data and other factors around potential consolidation, et cetera. A 5-year view, I think, is definitely smart to take a look at, and if there's a way to get that sooner than later to that committee, so they make a very informed, proposal to the board, that would be good.
Thank you, President Sandoval. I'll ask Robert to pull up the document that has by year, projects by year. That is part of the materials for today. And I think what we can do, and we'll ask ADM Group to help us with this, but just to, it's actually not this one, it's the other one, please. This is the 15-year. It should be, there it is. Thank you. So this particular document has been provided to the Citizens Advisory Committee, and it breaks out the 15-year project costs, that planning horizon, and distilled it down to a 5-year and then a 10-year plan. What we need to do with this is embedded in these dollar amounts by school is the low, medium, and high priority projects. By definition, the majority of the medium priority are critical in the sense that they're related to systems. The priority items are those life and injury and code concerns, and so they're top of mind. But what we need to be able to do is back out the low priority. I think that's the number Mrs. Pingarelli is asking for, and we should be able to provide that to the committee as quickly as possible.
Perfect. Thank you for that. All right. Thank you, Ms. Pingarelli. Moving on to Ms. Seha Martinez.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Myers and administration, governing board as well, for continuing in this, what is at times an uncomfortable conversation for me, at least. And I appreciate the continued research and asking questions to know that we've lifted every rock and considered every perspective. With that being said, I do want to highlight a couple things before I dive for my governing board ask is recognizing as we have these conversations, everything is recorded and the community has literally full transparency, and any topic we discuss, whether it be variances or a dollar amount, noted as Mr. Sandoval highlighted, it's not going to fix anything as a one-time fix. It is an ongoing process as a 1, 3, 5 year and the future of PUSD, and how do we continue evolving. So I know parents have shared a lot of information in the Citizens Advisory Committee about the North, and we haven't heard a lot from our community from the South. There is so much when considering this information. The other piece I hear my governing board members ask is a set dollar amount on the most critical needs. And this is an assumption that we're going back to normal. Getting back to where we were does not mean getting back to normal or business as usual. I recognize we see a number between 1 to 5 year, and that's assuming we don't change everything. We've received a utilization report that clearly identifies some school sites that need to be evaluated on what they offer our communities and our students. More importantly, what value are they adding to this innovative education that we are now in? Is a brick and mortar school sufficient enough to move us to the 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year? So I would caution the number that our governing boards seeking. So here's my ask of my governing board members. One, we do have a Citizens and Advisory Committee and a very timeline that they are asking for our priorities, and that we be very clear on what they are as we head into this space. 2, if there's a dollar amount that you have in mind and your intent, please share that. We want to encourage that dialogue so that our board members that are all diverse and come from all aspects of our community can work with that. So if there's a set number that you believe we should consider, then our board committee can say, we need to cut down this, we need to consider this. So my ask, just to reiterate, is for this board to clearly state their priorities, identify what's in our scope of the 1-year purview, 3-year purview, 5-year purview, as well as a dollar amount, which lends itself to the policy situation. We are responsible for budgets and policy. It's very difficult administration to make decisions on policy if our staff are not following them. So the first thing I'm going to ask is, within the RFP, we asked a third party to do and aggregate this data for us. Does the administration agree with the accuracy of the data presented to us today?
This is Chris Deeg. Yes. For the facility side, I would support their findings 100%.
What about in the facilities utilization in regards to capacity?
When we evaluated vendors to help us with the assessment and the utilization studies, we ensured that we had certified or licensed professionals or people who are recognized in their industry as being competent professionals. And the groups that we went forward with, ADM Group and Think Smart Planning, met that definition. So their product is a professional product. And again, a lot of time was spent providing the background on the methodology and the assumptions. And of course, anytime there's a study, if you change assumptions and variables, that could change the outcome. But we believe that both products were prepared by professionals who are highly regarded in their field.
I appreciate that, Ms. Myers, and I definitely value your opinion. To me, you're one of the best outcomes that I've had during my board term. But to be direct, do you agree with the data presented? I recognize that they're credentialized and they are tenure, but as we move forward and consider our strategic plan, we're going to use this data to make decisions going forward. Hence, reviewing a policy on variances, considering how we use our school districts. So is this data that we are going to translate, apply to our current strategic plan?
With the assumptions presented and the mitigating factors, and I think that's a very important comment on my part as far as the mitigating factors, and some of the assumptions that were presented, it's solid information for consideration. Our board should also note that we do provide our enrollment report at our board meetings, and so from our reporting to the state, any individual can look at the enrollment at our schools, and they can compare that to this report. So we don't have any indicator that this information could not be used. It was presented and prepared by a quality firm. I don't know if Mrs. Pallas-Thompson or Dr. Reynolds would like to add any comments to that.
Well, I'm comfortable with the firm and what their considerations. We also, talk to them about things like preschool and those qualifiers were added. But what wasn't in the report was the COVID mitigating factor. And that is going to be significant. For example, okay, how many of our children, regardless of what we do, are going to be returning to our schools in the fall? That's a number that I believe will be impacting. Or, for example, if online is the choice of kids, and we are able to provide significant online tutoring, online teaching, if you will, on things, there could be if for example 250 children decide, you know what, I which is only 10% of Liberty, I want to have my AP courses and my math courses and whatever online, and we're able to provide the excellence in those courses, that would lower our numbers by 10%, which is really, accommodates the open enrollment type of factors. So I think the COVID factor is going to be an interesting component of what we're going to be dealing with when we're looking ahead. So I don't know if that makes us take a look at other mitigating factors that'll be happening.
I appreciate that. And let me share, and Ms. Myers, I appreciate as well sharing your thought process out loud as well as our superintendent. Here's the intent of this. If we're saying we need in 1 to 5 year brick and mortar X amount of dollars, and we go out with a number and get it approved, education, as you just described, is not the same, because we have this situation. It could have been COVID, it could have been another emergency, but we have a situation that's literally changed what education is going to look like. And it's hard for me as one governing board member to say, we need $300 million for a 5-year 10-year plan if education is going to look different. Looking at our policies is part of this conversation. And so when I consider this data and making those types of decisions, I really rely on our administrators clearly understand the intent of the policy, how to execute it, and then understand where is the disconnect between policy and why we have close to 110% capacity over utilization at a high school. When the reality is, when we go back in August, it's going to look different. And our current class size at 35 is not sufficient. We already know that it's not sufficient for a learning environment. Coupled with the safety of our students, we would consider even more schools if we were going to have a lower classroom size to accommodate all these students for their educational needs and their safety. So I'm just thinking out loud of, okay, what does our policy look like? Why aren't our administrators executing it? Is it the board's responsibility to refine the policy? Who's owning that, and how do we move forward? So that's one train of thought, is the policy piece. The second piece I look at is in regards to program placement. And I'm going to bring up only one example, and it's Apache. Can you remind me in the community what programs are specifically at Apache Elementary School?
Mrs. Seja Martinez, are you asking related to special education or signature programs?
Anything related to Apache, because where I'm seeing is, okay, if Apache, some of the feedback and I'll give you some background. Thank you for that, Ms. Myers. Some of the background in the conversation I have heard either in a governing board meeting or in the Citizens Advisory Committee is, what programs can we shift to different schools to increase enrollment, to offset the high utilization of the seats? And I look at Apache, and it's reported, if I remember correctly, I think I wrote it down, 71.5% capacity utilization, and agreeing that we're all stating that the data presented is accurate and we're going to make decisions on. But if that school is at 71.5%, and one of the presentations said the ideal numbers between 80 and 90% we should be at capacity, why is this school under enrollment when there are programs on that site? So just to recap, is it one program, multiple programs?
Mrs. Seja Martinez, this is Dr. Bell. I know that we obviously have some of our gifted programming there, and we do have special education. I do not know how many rooms that takes up, but I can get that. I can get that information for us.
Okay. I don't need the numbers right now because it's going to depend on where the board wants to head, and it leans back to those priorities. So if we look at our program placement, and we've talked a lot about even Cactus High School low enrollment, but if we use Apache as one example, and it's at 71.5%, according to our third party, they identify that as lower utilization. We already have 3 programs, the gifted, the special ed, and a general ed, and they're not at what they identify as a good number, and good is subjective, but the number based on their presentation. Is Apache, is the program appropriate? Those programs appropriate for that school site? Are there other northern schools that have programs that we can transition into Apache? Those are the kinds of things. So where I'm getting at is, I still need, as a governing board member, to identify in all our school sites what programs we're offering, and I would even consider putting a committee together to look at what programs and how do we I think this word compete with with our charter schools. That's not the word I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is how do we add value to our students and what they're looking at to put them in a position where they are ready in the future as essential workers. What skill sets can we offer, credentials, certifications at our school sites where they become magnet schools? Some of our neighboring school districts have done a phenomenal job. And before I want to spend millions of dollars on the 1, 3, 5-year plan, I want to know that type of information. And so I caution a set dollar amount for that long of a time period. I hope that makes sense. So when I think about policy, I think about programming, I think about the dollar amount and how much we're going to invest and the time frame as we consider what is critical. The last piece of information that I did not see or hear in any one of these conversations as we consider these costs of our, and I'm going to, because in general, the majority of the lower schools that are underutilized, I haven't heard what are their operational costs. Is there any, so I know Ira Murphy was in one that I caught is under capacity, more than 50%. What, do we have an idea of what their operational costs for that building, all inclusive staff, running the day-to-day?
Thank you, Mrs. Ceja Martinez. We are required to do school level reporting annually. So we are able at a site level to determine costs related to utilities, overhead, and salaries. We do track all of our expenditures at a site level. So we're able to compile that information. And as I mentioned during the presentation, and I'll comment on this during the bond discussion, the committee, has been given this information, and the comment has been made that if an underutilized campus has high future costs related to repairs or upgrades, how would that be considered in relation to studying the use of that location for other purposes? So going back to that financial side and outcomes related to investments and expenditures and return on investment. So to answer your question, yes, we do have the ability to report out at a school level. And if the board would like to see that for some of the lower utilized sites, we can certainly provide that.
Thank you for that. And I think about some of the questions that our committee has asked is, okay, some of these underutilized sites, can we, I know there's a lot of laws and procedures and going out to the community for some aspects, but in general speaking, can we close 2 schools, build a brand new one? Can we put one school as a junior high reboundary and the other school as a K-6, like Dysart recently reported in the newspaper, as a middle high school? So I know that those ideas and concepts are out of their purview. My concern is if we commit to, let's just say, $1 million to fix 2 schools that are critical needs, and we decide as an administration and board to remove that school so that we can have a different outcome, I don't want to put money into a bottomless hole. Not that it doesn't add value, but because we're going to move forward in a different direction. So those are my concerns of wanting to commit to only the critical needs when we do have a critical need up north, which is the growth, and we do have older schools in the south, but without any vision from the board and administration to say we are going to move programs around, follow policy in regards to variances, and it concerns me that we don't know operational costs, because it may be more advantageous where we look at a lower expense school site that is lower in operational costs, keep that school and move things around. And the possibilities are endless, literally. One thing I haven't seen also in here in those operational costs is the district administration site. I believe there was a line item to see how much we need to fix that up. Is that correct? Was that in this utilization report, or was that in another bonds line item?
There is separate reporting from ADM Group on the assessment side of the study that has by school the projected costs. There's the 1 year, the 1 through 5 year total, 6 through 10, and then the 15-year, and embedded in those planning horizons are the low, medium, and high priority costs. So each school does have that. Also, there's an observations document that details and summarizes by school the types of projects that has been provided to the committee and is part of today's study session materials.
Perfect. And this is exactly what I was looking for. Thank you for bringing this up. So I think about it, this is not a new concept, so I'm not going to claim it, but I think specifically the administration center, I believe I saw $1.3 million as a consideration. We now know in this new environment, COVID-19, that do we need brick and mortar in that location on 63rd Avenue in Thunderbird? We have underutilized school sites. Could we, I know it's going to, there's going to be a small investment to get it up to par, or lease it out and move our district site to across the district. We are such a large district, so would we consider, or the board be innovative in saying, hey, let's have our board meetings at our new new smart school. Let's have in the north side a location for one building, or what makes the most sense, and rethink how this district is structured, because how we did it 130 years ago to now, it's not the same environment. The bottom line is I'm not comfortable putting all the money into the critical needs of our lower schools when we as a board and administration have not discussed a 1, 3, 5-year plan with innovative education, especially with the impact of COVID. We are going to go back, but we're not going to be business as usual. And I would hope that at the end of this time together, that this board comes back with very clear priorities for the committee and a timeline and policy review. And that's where I will end my mic.
Thank you, Ms. Sam Martinez, for those comments. And I don't disagree. Everything that you said is right on. It's what's in my head. Yeah. You know, do we have the right programs at every site? Yes, COVID-19, I think, is going to expose some opportunities in how we potentially reinvent education, and certainly the Peoria Unified School District. You know, there's some things that I haven't seen from a utilization perspective based on community schools or neighborhood schools, is, you know, how we use some of the space and some of our potentially underutilized, or I don't use the term underutilized, but our schools where the student population is less than what its capacity is, but can we morph, you know, some of those rooms into a very comprehensive community resource center where, yes, it does have, you know, the clothing closet and all the toiletries, et cetera, for our most vulnerable students, but also, you know, leverage some of the space to, you know, be able to, you know, bring in, you know, for counselors and our social workers and some of our partners like Southwest Behavioral Health, you know, are there, you know, a couple, 2-3 times a week for our students and their families. So I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot, and you mentioned a lot of them that we need to consider. And in my mind, that's going to take time, right? And I think as we mobilize and a committee, you know, have those discussions around mobilizing the committee to further expand on this utilization study. It's going to help us make very informed decisions on what our needs are moving forward without question. And that's why I think, you know, when Ms. Pingarelli brought up, you know, taking a look at, you know, a view that's not 15 years out, right? That's maybe 3-5 years out, because I think, you know, based on, you know, making the decision to, you know, repurpose a site or, you know, shift programs based on a particular community's needs. You know, again, those are going to take time, and if it takes build time, I mean, there's all of those considerations, right? So, you know, as we take a step back, I mean, you know, and I know this is one of the line items in this agenda, but, you know, understanding the dollar amount, I mean, I think for me, it's more in and around, you know, at least for me, right? It's how we define critical needs. And for me, what that means based on our just cause. And our just cause being every student, every day prepared to shape tomorrow, right? Certainly, in addition to that, you know, how we put them in a position to be successful, be in the right mindset, you know, all of the wraparound services, you know, all those are critical. And I would take that a little further to state, you know, how we are creating environments that are safe, supportive, and inspiring for all of our associates. You know, I think that those thoughts, that mindset, that intentionality, you know, I think needs to be in the decision and how we define critical needs, right? So that said, Ms. Myers, I appreciate your due diligence again, and taking a look at all the data that, or continuing to look at the data with the committee, and driving them to, you know, really present a smart bond and/or override option to the board here in May, so that we can, you know, make, so we can really a smart override and bond, I guess, proposal that does think about, you know, a lot of what Ms. Seah Martinez just said, you know, how we may need to shift the district based on findings due to COVID-19. And based on some of the other variables and dynamics that were mentioned. So I certainly appreciate your time there. Ms. Doan, through this conversation, any other thoughts as we've gone through this? Any other comments or any comments that you would like to make at this point on this particular line item?
Well, I would. I have heard some pretty insightful comments and a lot of technical detail, and a lot of information that we have, and a lot of information that we don't have and cannot get at this time. I think this is a really bad time to be having to make a decision to do a bond. We can't tell what we're going to really need, and we cannot tell what our community will support at this time. There's a lot of people hurting financially. There are businesses that are going to be, people are going to lose their businesses. Some people may lose their homes. This may be a very bad time to go out for a bond at all. Until we can see, like has been mentioned, until we can see what the impact of this pandemic is on our educational system. And that, you know, it's a lot of money to spend going out for a bond when we don't even know what we need for certain. We don't know what the impact is going to be. We don't know what our students are going to need, what our teachers are going to need. We don't know. And we have to say in the bond what it's for. So at this point, I'm going to encourage restraint, and I'm going to say we have to get more information, and I don't think we can get it all before May, and my recommendation is going to be to wait on the thing myself. I know that we want to have the studies done. We want to find out what's going on as best as we can, but I don't know that we can get the answers in time. And I believe Ms. Pingarelli had something else she wanted to say, and I'm very leery of asking for bond money when we don't know what the face of education is going to look like. So that's where I'm standing right now.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Ms. Pingarelli?
No, I was just wanting to get some clarity from Ms. Myers, and it kind of piggybacks on what Ms. Doan is saying in terms of potentially restructuring, closing schools. That is a topic that can't be addressed before a bond and or override recommendation that needs to go out. But my question is, in terms of the critical needs and this is kind of addresses Monica's question too, is that the category for the critical needs for repairs, if schools were, say there was 1 or 2 that were closed, that could be shifted to other schools. That's a category, and it's not by school site, but it's by a category of needs. Is that correct, Ms. Myers?
Mrs. Pingarelli, President Sandoval, are you asking specifically if activities at a certain campus were modified and students were moved to another location, that some of the associated costs might go to that new location? Am I understanding that correctly, or would you please restate your question?
Yeah, for a bond, you have to specify what it's used for. So if you say it's used for repairs, I don't know the classification, but you could use that at any school. It's not down to so specific that you have to use it at one particular school or another. My thing is, if we decide that our needs for the district is to close and consolidate schools, we can take money from that was going to be used for that school site and move it to another school site. The categories for the bond aren't so specific that they're school site dependent, if that clears it up.
Thank you, Mrs. Pingarelli. That's exactly right. In the voter information pamphlet and with the authorization amount, there are broad categories that would be delineated by, say, elementary school or high school, or if the authorization includes new construction, transportation vehicles for students, technology. So yes, it does not list a dollar amount by location in the voter pamphlet.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. Pingarelli.
To that point, Mr. Sandoval, can I share that unfortunately this study, and unfortunately, became a facility utilization study. The facility part and the utilization part, while connected, can be very separate. So when we're looking at facilities, we're looking for repairs, certainly the ones that endanger our children, or could be a hazard, or could be anything. Those are pieces that you can consider in a bond, that regardless of the utilization, we can take a look at, especially since, as Ms. Myers just said, that and Ms. Pingarelli just pointed to, we can use those for repairs anywhere, regardless of which school. The utilization component cannot be completed until later in the year. I know our task force is touching upon those issues right now, and a committee would be really nice to have, to be able to look at facility utilization as a whole. But you can separate, I believe we can separate the facility part and the utilization study part in half, and make some decisions with respect to a bond or not, with respect to what facility pieces do we need to do for the safety of our children.
Yeah, thank you for that, Superintendent Pellis Thompson. Yeah, no, I agree with everything you just said. I think for me, before being elected to the board, we had needs, which, one of them pressing, and it's even more pressing today, is the building of a new high school site in the northern sector. I think with the, Ms. Pingarelli's, question in and around the flexibility of those bond dollars and how they can be moved, based on the outcome of a utilization study and how we manage our sites moving forward, is a great point. So, fellow board members, thank you for your candid conversations. If no one has any other comment, I'd like to move to 3.2. And I believe, Ms. Contra, if I'm not mistaken, we have a public comment tied to 3.2 around the future bond discussion.
Yes, sir, we do. Thank you, President Sandoval. I will be reading the one public comment received regarding this agenda item. Good afternoon, President Sandoval, members of the Governing Board, and Superintendent Linda Pallas-Thompson. My name is Jill Melarani, and I am a Frontier Elementary parent. I am truly excited to hear everyone's thoughts about the future of our district, as well as priorities for our bonds and overrides. I would like to ask that you only go out for a 13% override this election cycle. We cannot allow our district to lose $9 million as we look towards an uncertain future. As a parent of 4 PUSD students, 2 graduates, and 2 elementary students that are being homeschooled right now, I see more than ever the need for qualified, engaged teachers in our district. It is my personal opinion that you consider removing the paid all-day kindergarten category and move this money to compensation. We must bring our teachers and support staff up to par with our neighboring districts before we lose even more of these precious resources. Both of my youngest children attended kindergarten at Frontier, and we were happy to pay for that formative year. Regarding the bond, I ask that you reach out to our community to gather their thoughts about considering campuses and condensing campuses in those schools that are severely underutilized in the southern part of our district. Scottsdale Unified went through a similar upgrade a few years ago, and so we would not be alone on this path. There are so many benefits and cost savings to this plan, a brand new school for our students, no more Band-Aid repairs, and most importantly, you will bring our district closer to reaching that 20% over capacity enrollment to pursue a grant from the SFB to build the desperately needed new high school in the north. We need all 5 of you to agree on the direction for our district and actively and publicly support a comprehensive bond in the future. As I have been a member of the 2 previous committees, I understand that we have opposition that believes we accept too many variances and that is causing the overcapacity issue. First, open enrollment is a state law and we receive funds when that student is out of district. Secondly, you can see that most of these are simply a swap between Liberty and Sunrise. And finally, while the opposition supports school choice, I believe that public school students should have that opportunity as well. While I always have and always will vote yes to any and all ballot measures for public education, I cannot tell you what it would mean to vote yes on a plan that would sustain our district for many years to come, rather than knocking on doors for Band-Aid bonds every few years. Thank you for your time, for your service and consideration.
Thank you for that, Ms. Contra. And, there again, as always, always appreciate public comment. Their voices are very important in how we make global decisions on behalf of this district. I think a lot of our points were, certainly discussed, in our prior conversation, and hopefully some of the answers can be found in our next line item 3.2. So if we can make sure that she does receive some type of a response based on her comments and any updates that we may have and can communicate to her in this present time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mrs. Myers, Superintendent Pallas-Thompson, Dr. Reynolds, bond authorization discussion.
Well, thank you, President Sandoval, and good afternoon again to our governing board and administration and Mrs. Pallas-Thompson. I'll now share information about bond authorizations and how they relate to the Peoria Unified School District. As we have shared before, at prior governing board meetings, Arizona law and the legislature does allow public school districts to ask voters to approve bond authorizations through local property taxes. A bond authorization allows a school district to sell bond issues up to an authorized amount to pay for district and campus-related construction projects, repairs, facility renovations, and other eligible capital items. Bond sale proceeds cannot be used for maintenance and operations expenditures and cannot be used to pay for staff positions or salaries or academic or extracurricular programs that are paid for with maintenance and operations dollars. Arizona revised statutes do require school districts to report annually to the community on the status of their bond programs and expenditures to date, and we do that each year in the month of October. And you'll recall that the district's most recent bond authorization was approved in 2012 by our community. It was a $180 million authorization that has been fully sold, and we have approximately $15 million of bond proceeds remaining for future projects. And if we go to the next slide for your reference, as a reminder, you'll see the categories in the 2012 program. And to reiterate some of the questions in our last agenda item, you'll note that the category is descriptive in nature and does not include a detailed list of each school that would be eligible for a renovation or an improvement, as an example there. And with the 2012 bond, a couple of additional comments. In addition to facility repairs at our elementaries and high school campuses, as well as district facilities. When I refer to a district facility, that's not just the district administrative center, but also our transportation yard, as well as our warehouse complex and food service complex as well. So those are examples of support facilities. And it's also important to note that the 2012 bond program did not include new construction. We have had bond authorizations in the past that do include new construction line items, and in recent years prior to 2012 we had a 2005 bond and a 2002 bond, and prior to that it was 1996. Next slide, please. Earlier this afternoon, in the study session, we did review the recent facility assessment and utilization study, and we did note that over 15 years, there were low, medium, and high priority projects totaling $300 million that were part of the study. And included in the reports were projects identified over the next 5 years totaling $132 million, again with the three priority categories. We will be updating that number for the board per your request without the low priority projects. The facility utilization study highlighted a population of schools also that do have a lower utilization rate. And as we discussed earlier, the impacts of how the utilization rate might reconcile to future bond projects and capital budget allocations. And that concept has been discussed with the Citizens Advisory Committee, and future expenditures could be planned with a future bond that would basically align a review of those schools with lower utilization to determine what future modifications might be made to the school or the school's purpose, and how the school is utilized prior to non-critical expenditures being made at the sites. And we did speak about that earlier this afternoon. And with the next slide, the facility assessment and utilization study does provide information related to critical and priority repairs and upgrade construction projects and capital needs that do need to be addressed in the next few years. The Citizens Advisory Committee has also received information during their meetings related to the cost of new school construction, and we'll also be providing next week the cost of land that districts typically purchase when they build a new high school. You'll note that we've received donations for elementary school sites in the past, but the high school land, not a donated item, we typically buy it. And so the price of a land parcel that would be large enough to accommodate a comprehensive high school will be provided. And the committee has also received information from IMT and transportation on required purchases that will need to be made over the next 5 to 7 years. And so these cost factors become variables and components of what could be designed as a critical needs bond compared to a comprehensive bond. And the question that our committee has been asking is priorities related to new construction, because new construction costs related to a high school or an elementary school would move a bond authorization dollar amount from being defined as critical needs to being a comprehensive authorization. And so the committee has asked for input and priorities in that area. If we move to the next slide, other considerations related to bond authorizations have also been discussed in detail with the committee, including tax rates, assessed valuations, and associated property taxes. The amortization of existing and new debt has also been discussed in detail. We've had guest speakers in that area, and I'll speak to that later in the presentation. Pending decisions related to campuses with lower utilization and higher maintenance costs have also been discussed by the committee, and differing perspectives on the scope of the committee has been a topic at many meetings because the committee is unclear with their scope if they can make recommendations on modifications on how a school is used, boundaries, and related considerations. And administration has reminded the committee of the committee's scope and that boundaries in school repurposing or closures, those types of discussions are outside of the scope of this particular committee. The question of 2 ballot questions in November, a bond and an override, or just an override or bond question, have also been discussed. In addition, information that the committee received last year from external election consultants highlighted that when there are 2 ballot questions, the majority of the time both questions do not pass. And also when there are 2 questions, more times than not, the bond question passes in lieu of an override. Enrollment projections were shared with the Citizens Advisory Committee from Applied Economics, and these projections can be considered in conjunction with the facility utilization study results when making a determination on a critical needs bond versus a comprehensive bond decision. And as I mentioned just a few slides back, Stiefel, Nicholas and Company, the district's bond underwriting firm, has also provided information to the committee related to SFB funding and when school districts qualify for construction funds for elementaries or high schools. And we noted during that presentation the district would qualify for a high school, a new high school, before we would qualify for an elementary school, but we do not qualify at this time, as well as property tax rates, how to read a property tax statement. And the information that was provided to date reflects the district's intention to have a consistent declining tax rate, meaning it would be consistent or whenever possible would decline. We don't want to have an unstable tax rate or an increasing tax rate. And that is part of decisions that would be put in place related to future bond sale sizes, as well as amortization timelines, that repayment timeline, and how a new bond would correlate to existing bond sales that are still being paid off and being amortized. The tax rate related to the authorization scenarios that was reviewed by the committee ranged from $75 million to $250 million. And with that, that also shows the spectrum of what could be the beginning of a critical needs bond to a comprehensive bond and the authorization's subsequent tax impact. If we go to the final slide, this concludes the bond discussion presentation, and administration is available to answer your questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Myers, for the presentation. Ms. Stone?
Well, that all seems pretty much the same as usual. We know the situation's not the same, but the legalities are the same, and we'll have to see, you know, what's going to happen. But thank you for the information. Appreciate it. I'll like to hear what everybody else has to say.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Stone. Ms. Underhill?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of hold my general thoughts so far, but the one question I do have, and I should have kind of clarified this before, is with the $15 million that we have in current bond dollars, could some of the existing $15 million cover the $9 million in high priority needs that are listed in the attachment that you provided?
Mrs. Underhill, yes, they could.
Okay, so the majority of that money is not already committed to other things at this time.
There are committed amounts this year. As I mentioned, we've purchased some student transportation vehicles, and I should also comment by category. Some of the remaining bond sale proceeds are within the line item of transportation needs. And so if there is a critical repair that needs to be addressed at this time, we do have the ability to use either bond dollars if the repair is bond eligible. I want to be careful to make that point, or capital dollars. But administration and Mr. Deeg's department, they're evaluating those priority projects, and we need to reconcile what was in the report to what we already have on the docket to see where there's something that's different. We've been very careful since November of 2018 to prioritize our bond expenditures, as Mr. Deeg commented, to where it's critical systems and safety, anything that was considered to have any component of an aesthetic aspect, those types of things are on hold. And so when we provide our report in October, and we also looked at this, I believe, at the January retreat, as well as we provided this in a Friday report, the projects that are on deck for the remainder of this year. And then we're going to look at fiscal 21 and any expenditures after that year as far as priorities, and would consider the report's dollar amount and project list with that discussion.
Great, thank you. I'm going to hold the rest of my thoughts until after the override presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Underhill. Ms. Pingerelli?
Thank you, President Sandoval. I just wanted to, I want to first thank the committee. I know that this is a lot of time spent, and I really appreciate all of their hard work. I know this is not the first time that they've been doing this. A lot of them came back from last year, and I also want to thank Ms. Myers for heading up and providing all the information. That being said, this is a very difficult, unusual time with the health crisis, with the economic crisis. You know, a lot of people are furloughed or losing their job, their health care, and I'm just going to cut to it. I think that if we have this many critical needs that has been identified, that we need to go out with a critical bond and or override with a tax decrease. I think a tax neutral or a tax increase in this particular election year, as a presidential election year with everybody turning out, is going to be difficult to pass. That being said, I think that we need to really look outside the box. I agree there is tremendous need in the North. That's why I've always been harping on out-of-district students, not to overcrowd Sunrise Mountain and Liberty. I think that we need to look, like I said, outside the box at synchronous learning at our high schools. You know, maybe proctored testing centers so we can ensure, you know, an accurate test score. You know, which would lower the number of students at high schools. I think that right now the board is going to have to make some very, very difficult decisions along with the city of Peoria and the state of Arizona. It's not going to be an easy year for anybody at this point. So looking at the critical needs that are needed, I am really concerned that if we go out with a tax neutral or tax increase, that the citizens will not vote for that. So I always take a conservative position, and I think that we need to put it out, keeping in mind the needs of our voter base. So that's what I got to say right now. I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say.
Thank you, Ms. Pingerelli. I'm going to pause for a second, if it's okay with everybody. I know the flyover, I don't know if it's taking place now. I don't know if anyone wants to get up and look outside to see if planes are flying around their neighborhood, but do you guys mind if we pause for about 5 minutes, or I'm certainly fine with keeping going?
I think a pause would be good too, President Sandoval, so I can take a quick ladies break. So I'm okay with that.
And
Mi-
President Sandoval, I was
hey,
thinking that it was around 3:40, but I could be wrong. Do you know if is it this early?
Mr. Gay, I think you had I thought you had an approximate time.
Yeah, it was advertised. I'm sorry to interrupt. It was advertised to be at 3:10.
Ah,
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I'll tell you what, Kim, is it okay if we pause? Let's say, so it's 3:12 now, just for 5 minutes, so about 3:17?
Yes, sir, absolutely. I could start the timer from here. I don't know if it actually shows physically, though, on the screen. So that is totally fine with me.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, let's pause for about 5 minutes. Thank you. Ms. Pingrelli, you may be correct. Maybe 340 is the time, or they're just running behind, or could have already flown over.
President Sandoval, this is
Yes, sir.
Jason Reynolds.
Hey,
The flyover came right over my house downtown. Very impressive.
nice.
So they must be looping back towards the West Valley about that 340 time.
Okay. Well, if everybody's back, we can continue along and get through this.
I'm back. This is Corey.
Hey, Kim, do you mind doing a quick roll call?
Absolutely. President Sandoval,
Here.
Mrs. Underhill,
Here.
Mrs. Seha Martinez, Mrs. Jones,
Here.
Mrs. Pingarelli. So it looks like we're still missing Mrs. Pingarelli and Mrs. Seha Martinez.
Okay. Let's give them a minute or so. Ms. A.R. Martinez, Ms. Pingarelli, are you present?
David, I'm present. I pulled up the map. I had were they over your area? Because I have it at over kind of our area around 340.
Okay. Yeah, no, they weren't. Dr. Reynolds did mention that they flew over his place, which is the downtown Phoenix area. So I apologize for doubting you. It sounds like 340 is probably the right time for our area.
Yeah, somebody had given me their path. It looked by 328 or so by over Gilbert, back to Scottsdale around 330. And then it looks like around Peoria, it looks like around 340.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, well, President Sandoval,
yes, sir.
Having just experienced it, you will absolutely hear them coming.
Okay.
Yeah, I bet.
I'm not outside, so I might have to break off to go and look. So.
Me neither. You'll still hear them coming.
Okay.
I live right out by Luke, so they went right by here.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I love being in San Diego and going to the Miramar air show with the Thunderbirds.
Yeah, great. All right, Ms. A.R. Martinez, are you present?
I am here. Yep.
Perfect. All right, you are next.
All right. Well, thank you. And again, I really appreciate that insight to hear my governing board's perspective. Where I think about, I'll segue. Ms. Underhill, you asked a question exactly what I was thinking. One of the questions that I wrote down is, as a result of the new data, have we made any changes on addressing those critical needs with the old bond? And to me, as of now, I'm comfortable with the response that I received. So it sounds to me like an overall yes, we're shifting. Which brings me to the Citizen Advisory Committee has asked for a lot of guidance and perspective from the board. For me, where I come into making decisions based on what I have, I shared there's a lot that I would like us to continue to look at. And then I look at my experiences that I've had throughout my years within this school district, and how have we provided solutions to school sites that are overcrowded, which would lead me to, just to be direct, what I see a bond looking like. I would like the committee to consider is identifying the school sites under that critical needs, or any school site, is keeping it up to code. What does state statute say, and what is the safety? So building code is the #1 priority in regards to safety. The second item I would consider is a technology piece. I would also like the committee to consider
Ms. Say, I think we lost you for a sec.
Yep, looks like you lost me. But the last, so you heard technology, but the last or second item, or the third item, I would like us to consider, and it is a Band-Aid, and I recognize that, so that the administration can come back with the board's request. I recognize it's a Band-Aid, is a portables at Liberty High School, or adding a new building or a wing to Liberty High School. We have that at Centennial High School. The intent was supposed to be temporary, but we still use those buildings, and it will take us to our next phase, which is diving deep. And also a line item for land. Being in the current economic situation and how things are going to look, we need to be ready to purchase land for a high school, as we've been identified as informed as a governing board. Developers do not give land for high school, so we need to be ready to purchase the land. So to identify and recap my bond priorities is building code and safety, technology, portables, and land.
Thank you for that, Ms. San Martinez. I think for me, it's again, as everyone has stated, Ms. Myers, you and team are doing a phenomenal job. This isn't easy, and it's certainly not easy considering the current dynamics, right? The state of our city, our state, nation. That said, Ms. Underhill brought it up. It would be good to understand. I think the committee would appreciate it as well. Is how much of that 15 million can we assume, maybe if it's an assumption or our best guess, that can be used, for some of these critical needs, right, that we're looking at now. Again, as I define critical needs, I said it earlier. I do believe, critical needs does include a high school. So that's the only line item that I'm not seeing, in that. In that category. But I mean, even if it includes a line item that at a minimum, we can take a look at purchasing land. I think that's a move in the right direction to ensure the community that we are absolutely, moving forward, building a high school in the northern sector of our district. I agree with all of our board members that safety is of the essence for sure, without question. And one thing, and going back again to Ms. Pingarelli's thought on kind of a shorter term bond that would get us through this time, that allows us to be very informed on how we adapt our schools. But I do have a question around the bond, I guess, protocol, Ms. Myers. You had mentioned earlier to Ms. Pingerelli's question around the flexibility of being able to kind of, I don't want to use the word move those dollars around, but some flexibility in the dollars of tied to a bond. Now, do we also have the same level of flexibility that maybe the outcome of our, of a committee that we look to mobilize to assess the utilization, to assess the programs, to assess the school sites, et cetera, and where we need to adapt? Do we have flexibility to not have to sell, all those bonds, although approved, by the public? And how does that potentially impact the district for future bonds? So that's my question.
Thank you, President Sandoval, members of the board.
It was actually a good question.
I'll address your questions in order. I'm just making a couple of quick notes. Okay, so when it comes to an authorization, there's a total. I'll use our 2012 bond as an example, which is $180 million. And then within the voter pamphlet, there were dollar amounts aligned with elementary school renovations and improvements, high school renovation improvements, transportation vehicles, technology, and then district facilities. The dollar amount with each category is not location specific. It doesn't say you have to spend X amount at Centennial, X amount at Sunrise Mountain. It just,
Michelle, he didn't ask that.
Pardon me. I apologize. I'm giving some background to make the connection. What I'm answering with that question is because he said, I don't want to use the term moving money around. We have flexibility within the category total. And then adding up those categories, again, using 2012 as the example, by statute, a district can move between categories up to 10% of the bonds sold. And with our 2012 bond, we've I believe moved $1 million between two categories. So the first question was, is there flexibility? There's flexibility within the category as long as you're meeting the definition of the category, irregardless of where it's spent at a site. And then among categories, you do have by statute the ability to reallocate between categories up to 10% of the bonds sold to date. So I believe that was the first question. The second question then, is a district required to sell all of the bonds if there's an authorization? And the response is no, there is a statutory requirement to sell the bonds within a certain period of time. However, the community and the planning for the tax rate, as well as the amortization and payback of the associated debt, is oftentimes programmed into the size of the bond and what is being purchased. And what I mean by that is a comprehensive high school costs without land approximately $80 million to build. So a bond sale or sales to fund that type of a project would then reprioritize other sales for technology or repairs, because it's the amortization and the payback that affects the tax rate. And then secondly, if you're buying something that has a short useful life, for instance, computers, we're required to have a short amortization for the bonds related to those types of sales. So yes, a district does not have to sell all of the bonds within an authorization. If they don't spend the proceeds from a bond sale, it has to be returned to reduce the tax rate. But to go into a bond authorization saying, well, we'll ask for a certain amount and perhaps we won't use all of it, would impact planning throughout the life of that bond program.
Yeah, no, I got you. And I think for me, my intent wouldn't be that. It would just be more in and around, once this, subsequent committee that we're discussing goes out and does their due diligence, and, and we make decisions sooner than later in and around, potentially condensing, some of our sites, and therefore leading to, the need to not have the need for the entire bond authorization. I guess it was more there than the earlier. So no, I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving along. We are now on 3.3, maintenance and operations override discussion. I'm assuming that is you again, Ms. Myers.
Thank you, President Sandoval. Thank you, members of the governing board. Mrs. Pallas Thompson and administration. Yes, this will be the final presentation that we'll have this afternoon related to our maintenance and operations override. And I will provide general information to help support conversation in this area. And if we move to the next slide, just a couple of reminders to share with the board and our community that Arizona Revised Statute 15481 and the legislature allow school districts to request from their community approval to have an increase above their normal revenue control limit for a maintenance and operations budget from an amount ranging from 10% to 15%. If there is voter approval, authorization is for 7 years, and if the current override is not renewed by year 5, the increased funds begin to phase out in year 6 and 7 and are fully eliminated in year 8. And the district can attempt to renew the override prior to the phase down, or if it's not renewed prior to a phase down, they still have the opportunity to go out in year 6, but they would be incurring budget reductions if they had not renewed by the end of year 5. Next slide, please. And as a reminder, we currently have a 13% override that was approved by our community in November of 2015 and went into effect in July of 2016. Our current override provides funding for staff, positions, and programs. As I mentioned with the bond presentation, M&O dollars are for positions and programs. You can't use them to pay for bond eligible expenses, and vice versa. You wouldn't use bond proceeds to pay for staff compensation and related expenditures. And again, I mentioned that we are at the point of year 5 with our current override, and we basically will incur mandatory budget reductions starting in fiscal year 2020 if our current 13% override is not renewed on November 3rd, 2020. As we share each year in October, we have had an override in place for many years, going back, I believe it's to 1996 when we looked at past override elections. And we previously had a 10% override with the 13% being approved in November of 2015. When we had that increase to the 13%, that allowed the district to pay for all-day kindergarten, as well as to have teacher and staff compensation increases. So for many years, athletics and extracurricular activities, physical education, nurses, art, band, and choir, assistant principals, and maintaining class size have all in part been supported by having an override in place. Next slide, just as a reminder, in October, similar to our bond reporting, we do include a report and an update related to our override and the expenditures by category. In addition, all of our maintenance and operation expenditures are reported in our annual financial report that is available on the district's website. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see, in addition to looking at tax rates related to varying options with the bond authorization, we have also looked at the tax rate and the proceed change, or I shouldn't say proceed, excuse me, the budget increase change with a range of 10% to 15% from an override perspective. You'll note highlighted in the taupey gray, that's our 13%. Our current override does provide $27.8 million of funding in our fiscal year 2020 budget. But if you go by category, the change in funding is approximately $2.1 million or $100 of limited assessed valuation from a tax rate perspective. So the committee has been looking at the district's current primary and secondary tax rates, looked at 19 and fiscal 20, the year we're currently in. And as a reminder, the district does not set the primary tax rate. That's a state level qualifying tax rate. Where our community has input is with bonds and overrides, and that's paid for from secondary property taxes. And we actually looked at how that rate has come down over the last couple of years, and projections going out into the future on what the combination of an M&O override and bond authorization would look like, again, with that declining tax rate objective. And one thing we've noted is our assessed valuation has gone up throughout the district in recent years. And we are seeing, with the payback and amortization of existing bond sales, a decline with our bond tax rate and override in combination. That secondary rate has gone down, and that's a consideration for the committee as they make a recommendation for the governing board. And next slide, those considerations, as I mentioned, include the tax rate, as well as should there be 2 ballot questions or 1? What percentage should be considered? We know that a 15% override was not successful at the ballot. We know that 13% is our current rate if it's not renewed. We will have budget reductions. A third of the override would be reduced in fiscal 2022. Using this year's budget as a benchmark, that would be in excess of $9 million. And then an additional 9 would be added the following year for approximately $18 million, and then the full 27.8 would be fully eliminated in fiscal, I believe it's 2024, which I'll mention on the next slide. And so time is of the essence with our current override, as well as considering our current economic factors and updates from the state and the impacts of COVID-19. So the committee is reconciling all of those considerations. And then finally, input from the board has been requested as well regarding the percentage for the override, as well as the positions and programs that are currently funded from our 13% override. And again, that date is so critical on November 3rd, because without a renewal, we will be required to have mandatory budget cuts starting the next year, and the override would be fully eliminated in fiscal year 2024. And with that, we'll go to the final slide, which is administration's opportunity to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Ms. Stone?
I'm sorry, I had something pop up and I've been away from the mic a while, but I was able to hear because it was on loud. So that I appreciate the information, and I would like to, I guess I just want to say I think it's also a very good idea with bringing in a tax decrease, and we do need a lot of we need the money. This has been supporting a lot of things that are in place and need to be in place. So if we can continue to move in a direction of a tax decrease, that seems very wise to me, and also as a way to help our community and also the district itself. So I appreciate the information, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Ms. Underhill?
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I can tell that, everybody has really been thinking through all this, and you all have, brought up a lot of good points, and there's a lot of things to consider for sure. So I appreciate listening to everybody and just gathering that information. Where I'm at right now is kind of based on the fact that the override is about to sunset. That, to me, I feel like is the first priority, especially considering that the statistics are not good when we have two questions on the ballot. I do think that going out at 13% would be wise. As you can see, it shows that the rate will decrease over time anyhow, so that is a positive for the community. I just think with the state budget potentially being impacted by the whole COVID thing, it's just really critical. We have prioritized staff and salaries, and I think that we need to kind of remember that as we make this decision. As far as the bond, I think that, recognizing that there are significant needs, and there's definitely a need for a high school in the north, but we have so many unknowns with the whole facility utilization piece. My recommendation there would be if we do have funding, right, by the way, right now to meet some of those high priority needs. My recommendation at this point would be that if we do some sort of a bond, that it may be just to be for land for the high school so that we can have that piece identified. But in the meantime, if we were able to pass the override, that we would effective soon launch a facility utilization committee that could then do the work that we really need to do to have a comprehensive plan for a bond that would, make the most sense for our underutilized schools and allow us to build that high school out. So that's where I'm at with the bond. I just think that we, well, the land piece is a high priority, and I think the utilization study has shown that even with open enrollment, we still are over. So the high school is a definite thing that we need. I just don't know with the COVID piece and all that, how that's going to impact what that might need to look like and what the cost will be around that. So from my perspective, going out for the override at 13% with potentially some sort of a bond for the high school land piece, if that's even a possibility, or maybe that's the next piece, but definitely launching the facility utilization committee to create that more comprehensive bond plan for the future. I will say within the override, I think the categories are good as they stand. I think that we definitely want to keep the paid for all day kindergarten. I just think that's such a critical piece, especially with about 57% of our schools being Title I schools. We know that early piece is critical. So that's where I stand right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Underhill. Ms. Pingarelli?
Thank you, President Sandoval. Yeah, no, just as my comments before, I think that with the state of the economy right now, and with our people within our district hurting, that I think the override would, I believe, take priority over the bond. But I still think that in order to get the override to pass, or an override in a critical needs bond, that it needs to be slightly below in tax rate. I think the community would be more receptive. And right now, I think with everything that's going on, I think everything's up in the air. So that's what I got to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Pingarelli. Ms. Sayar Martinez?
Thank you, President Sandoval. Board, I again highlight and appreciate the thought process and the candor. No doubt about this is definitely a difficult conversation, and I've always stood by people. Needs to come first in PUSD. And I think about what Ms. Underhill said about prioritizing the override over the bond, and I would echo that. I agree that the override needs to be the priority. I do have concerns with the statistics provided by the administration on the findings of putting 2 voting measures on the ballot, concerning. If we were to only do an M&O override option, I hear Ms. Pingarelli's comments. Still, we have an uphill battle due to the current, not only economic environment, but the election environment, and what we're about to face are a bunch of unknowns. So considering a 12%, as much as that pains me, that would meet the needs of Ms. Pingarelli's request of dropping that impact. However, I would also want to reiterate the categories need to change. Hands down, Ms. Underhill, you highlighted the importance of all-day kindergarten, where 57% of our students are identified, or school sites, schools are identified Title I. We cannot forego early childhood education. The impact and the research is immense of where it takes our children. I would have the committee consider removing line items such as athletics. And we have received some insight from our superintendent that our PE structure currently at the high school level is not mandated for high school graduation. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Pallas Thompson, but if that is money that we could consider and move that to close one of our highlights or priorities that the governing board discussed is compensation for all staff. So I would consider the 12%, but removing and changing those buckets where we put more into compensation to start to close that gap. And I'll stand there.
Thank you, Ms. Sam Martinez. And yes, thank you, fellow board members, for really just your thoughtful conversation. For me, it's as we take a look at one of the things that we continue to look at is the culture of our district, right? And creating trusting environments and teams, and some of them, as I just stated, and I'm with her. It's we absolutely have to prioritize people over resources without question. That said, and I agree with Ms. A. Martinez and Ms. Underhill around the kindergarten. It's a line item that there's just so much data out there that around the impact of early childhood education on their success is it's a critical component to what we do. That said, all the programs that we have in PUSD, from the arts and athletics, these are programs that separate us, from some of the other districts, and it is these programs that make us a desirable district to families. And again, keep in mind, we're a big part of why individuals move here to the city of Peoria. That said, I think the line items as they sit from last year, although we're taking 2 percentage points away from last year's ask, which I believe is was tied to safety and throughout the district, but which is very important, right? As a district. But I think for me is my question would be this: knowing that 13% does not include the safety line item that we had last year. What are the plans, or what are some thoughts to be able to continue to ensure that our work environments, our learning environments, are all safe and supportive? And I don't know if that's Mr. Duguid or Superintendent Pallas Thompson, but just would love to, I guess, hear a response there.
Yes, I'm Mr. Sandoval. Hi. Thank you, by the way, for all the thoughtful comments and directives that we really needed. Some of your goals, some of your insights. We do need the safety piece. Has to do, I think, with counselors, social workers, the types of program and resource activities that our people will be needing. What it could require is us looking at each of the line items and determining where we can maybe cut back on for example, the athletics and intramural kinds of activities. What percent can we cut to accommodate if we go for 13 or 12 or whatever, the ability to say, all right, what is the least amount we can do to continue those line items, make them effective? Do we need all the reading components? Since we're adopting a new reading series, what do we actually need for that? So we can take a look at all of those. You're correct. Safety and well-being is a category that I would love us to be able to incorporate within whatever percent we deal with. So I think the committee can take a look at those. I think every line item is, as you said, critical and adds to the culture of what we're about in Peoria. But at the same time, we can take a look at how do we cut back if we have to on some of those items if the percentage is different.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you for that. So with that said, from the overall perspective, I think that 13% is the right percentage to ask. Again, it just like I said, all of our programs that we have as a district, absolutely influence the success of our kids, and without question. Going on to the bond, I said it earlier. What I don't see in the critical needs, which has been a critical need, since I was elected to the board, is that new high school site in the northern sector, of our district. And, I think, critical bond should include that. I do appreciate the flexibility that Ms. Underhill, spoke about, meaning, it doesn't mean, we just add land for now to get that secured and then go out, in a subsequent year, which, I think the community would certainly appreciate that we're moving in that direction and making sure that we accommodate the growth in that area. It's what I do appreciate is the flexibility that you communicated, Ms. Myers, based on the conversation and really question that Ms. Pingerelli had, in and around, how some of those dollars can be, I guess, moved from site to site, and certainly the question I had as well. So, I mean, that is that flexibility, certainly aligns well with, I think, everything that all of us have said this late afternoon, which is there are a lot of shifting components as we move forward as a district, without question. Every day something changes. We are learning more about our district, as we are going through COVID-19, and how, again, we reinvent ourselves, reinvent education and how we operate. So having that flexibility to, as we mobilize, to Ms. Underhill's point, a committee, to take a deep dive into utilization and what that means, to our school sites, is that feels good. So to kind of circle around and just say, look, I'm the override at 13%. The critical bond, with its flexibility, we need, some of those sites to maintain safety and standards. So our children's learning environments are, again, safe and supportive, and our teachers teaching environments. But I do feel that critical bond should include some form of a progression in and around adding a new high school site in the northern sector. That said, I do believe that the committee would appreciate and be able to, assess or come to us with, a proposal or two that, considers the current 15 million that we have in our current bond, to Ms. Underhill's point, and how much of that may be able to be used towards some of those critical needs, which may lessen the ask a little bit. And then to Ms. Pingerelli's point, in and around the timing, right? And what a, 3-5 year view looks like, as we, go through the assessment that includes a lot of and many of the dynamics that Ms. Ceja Martinez spoke of earlier. So, that's where I'm at on these two items. I think for me, as we look at our partner to help us, campaign in and around these asks, if you will. We have so much knowledge of the campaigns that we've ran over the last since 18, right? 2018, last year. Look, we know that we have, a certain voting sector that they're on fixed incomes, and we need to be sensitive to that. But I think where we came close, and one of the bigger reasons why we came close in 2019 in and around the override, in addition to, yes, it could have been because it was an off year, but was because the voter participation was higher, right? So I think if we take a look at, as we go out, we need to understand, how we can get those 10,000 plus voters that didn't vote at all, to get them to vote and make sure that they are voting informed, right? And understanding what these measures mean and the impact that it has on our youth. So that said, those are my comments. But Michelle, Ms. Myers, district leadership, the committee, all involved, certainly my fellow board members, just thank you for just being very thoughtful and global and around this discussion. It's a tough decision, but I think if we're informed and it's focused on our just cause, we'll make the right decision. Thank you.
President Sandoval.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Corey again. I just feel like I would be remiss if I didn't, agree with your assessment of, the importance of athletics to our district. Not only because of what it provides for our kids and the draw, but also because of what it does around community engagement and revenue and scholarships for our students. So I just wanted to say that. And then I did have one other question. I know we had the statistic around that 9 out of 10 times on a double question ballot, only the bond would pass. My curiosity is around if you have bonds 2 years in a row, what's the percentage of those, what's the success rate on that? So that's just something for later. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Board members, any other comments on this particular line item?
Mr. President Sandoval, Ms. Underhill, I do want to take a moment to readdress. I agree that, and Mr. Sandoval, that the programs do attract our students to go to certain school sites as their programs, but highlighting the first point, which is, are our programs most advantageous for all our students so that they can become successful adults? I would also question if we attract students out of district as a result of our athletics, is that offsetting to what our conversation is in regards to variances? I know that at some high schools, there are out of district students that particularly come to our school sites for athletic programs. So I would just like to highlight that the data that we receive on variances and out of district students, Dr. Reynolds, as you look at where the students are coming from, asking why, what programs, so that we can try to emulate and spread that out around our district. So it's most advantageous. But thank you for leading this today, President Sandoval.
No, thank you. And no, I agree with what you just said. I mean, I said it earlier. I think we need to be cautious and mitigate, our open enrollment policy, but in the same breath, we should hang our hat and be proud of the fact that, students from all over want to come to our district for various reasons, right? Athletics is one, but I also think our academics and our programs, those are all aspects of PUSD that are very attractive to our families. But thank you for that.
Address to Melissa and Sean.
Mr. Sandoval?
Yes, Ms. Down.
I'm sorry, I'm late for another appointment. I have to leave right now.
No, that's okay.
It's been great, but I have to go.
No, thank you for that. I'm not sure of the meat of 3.4, but I believe we might have actually merged into that line item. But no, Ms. Down, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I will talk to you later.
All right. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, if everybody's okay, we'll move on to 3.4, Citizens Advisory Committee discussion. Looking at the background, Ms. Myers is, I think we've all kind of expressed where we sit with these two measures, but again, I want to allow every board member to comment here. So with that said, is there further Ms. Underhill, any other direction that you would like to give our Citizens Advisory Committee outside of what we've discussed?
No, I'm good. I feel like I've I've stated and restated it. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Ms. Pingrelli?
No, I'm good also. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ms. Sayre Martinez?
Same here.
All right. I think I'm clear as well. So that's any discussion from district leadership. Superintendent Palace Thompson, Deputy Superintendent Dr. Reynolds, any closing comments on this on 3.4? Nope. Okay. All right. That said, I do need a motion to adjourn this meeting.
All right, I move that we adjourn the study session.
I second that.
Okay. So, Ms. Contra, we have a motion by Ms. Underhill to adjourn and a second by Ms. Seha Martinez. Everybody cast their vote, and if Ms. Contra, if you want to do a roll call.
Thank you, President Sandoval. And yes, I will do that roll call for the record. Mrs. Pingarelli.
Aye.
Mr. Sandoval.
Aye.
Mrs. Jones is not present at the vote. Mrs. Seha Martinez.
Aye.
Mrs. Underhill.
Aye.
Perfect, motion passes.
All right, very good. Everybody, thank you again for your time. Great discussions. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.